Amara sat in her small shop in Abuja, the sound of her old sewing machine filling the room. The fabric under her hands was worn, just like her tired eyes, but she kept stitching with quiet determination. She was a widow, raising two children alone, and every day felt like climbing a steep hill. Her income was barely enough to buy food and keep her children in school, yet she was known in her community for always sharing what little she had. If someone was hungry, she would cook. If someone needed help, she would give. People often wondered how a woman with so little could still be so generous, but Amara's heart was built on kindness. As evening came, the sky turned dark and heavy with rain. Thunder rolled in the distance, and her children huddled close beside her. The wind howled through the cracks in their small home, and the roof shook under the weight of the storm. Just as Amara was about to close her door, a sudden knock startled her. She hesitated, unsure of who would be outside on such a night. When she opened it, a man stood there, drenched and weary. His clothes were torn, and he carried nothing but a small bag slung over his shoulder. His face looked tired, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "Please," he said softly, his voice almost drowned by the rain. "I have nowhere else to go. Can I stay here tonight?" Amara's heart pounded. She looked at her children, then back at the stranger. The storm raged behind him, the lightning flashing across his face. Her neighbor's warnings echoed in her mind. Never trust strangers, especially men who come with nothing. Yet as she stood there, she saw not a threat but a human being in need. Her hand gripped the door tightly. Every part of her screamed to be careful, but her heart whispered differently. Slowly, she stepped aside, letting the man into her small home. She offered him a dry corner and a bowl of food. The stranger sat quietly, gratitude in his eyes, as Amara wondered if she had just welcomed safety or danger into her life. The man introduced himself as Bongani, his voice low and heavy with fatigue. His clothes were worn, his shoes covered in dust, and the small bag slung over his shoulder looked almost empty. He seemed like someone who had walked for miles with nowhere to rest. Amara studied him carefully, torn between fear and compassion. The storm outside rattled the windows, and her children clung to her dress, their eyes wide with worry. Bongani lowered his head and said softly, "I only need a place to stay for the night. I won't trouble you any further." His words carried both desperation and humility, as though he was used to being turned away. By morning, word had already spread. Neighbors who saw the stranger enter Amara's home the night before began whispering. Some came straight to her door, warning her that strangers could not be trusted. "A man who wanders with nothing must be hiding something," one woman muttered. Others shook their heads, calling Amara foolish for allowing him near her children. Even her close friend Chidinma urged her to be cautious. "Amara, the world is dangerous. Kindness can cost you dearly." But Amara's heart was different. She had known what it felt like to knock on doors and receive no answer. She had known hunger and rejection, and she could not bring herself to turn someone away on a stormy night. Looking at Bongani, she saw not a threat but a man broken by life. With quiet resolve, she told her neighbors, if he meant us harm, he would not have knocked. Sometimes kindness is safer than suspicion. That evening, Amara prepared a simple meal of rice and stew, sharing it equally with her children and the stranger. Though her portions were always small, she made sure Bongani had enough. Later, she laid out a thin mattress in the corner of her modest home, giving him a place to rest. Bongani bowed his head in gratitude, saying little, but his eyes carried a weight Amara could not yet understand. As she put her children to sleep, she wondered if her decision was right, yet deep inside, she felt a strange peace. By morning, the rain had cleared, but the storm in the neighborhood had only just begun. As Amara stepped outside to fetch water, she noticed the way people stared. Groups of women stood by the roadside, their voices lowered but their eyes fixed on her house. Men sitting at the kiosk shook their heads, whispering as she passed. Everyone had seen the stranger enter her home the night before. Now the market buzzed with gossip. "Did you hear? Amara allowed a strange man to sleep under her roof," one woman said loudly enough for her to hear. Another added, "A widow with children, letting a wanderer into her home? What if he's a thief? What if he harms them?" Their words stung, but Amara kept her head high, refusing to respond. She had endured gossip before, and she knew how quickly people judged what they did not understand. Later that afternoon, her friend Chidinma arrived, her face lined with worry. She closed the door behind her and spoke in a hushed tone. "Amara, you must be careful. People are talking. You don't know who that man is or what he carries in his heart. What if he brings trouble to your children?" Chidinma's concern was genuine, but her voice carried the same fear that echoed through the community. Amara sighed and sat down, her children playing quietly nearby. She remembered the weary look in Bongani's eyes, the way he had eaten slowly, as if savoring each bite of food, and how he had quietly thanked her before lying down to rest. She looked at Chidinma and answered calmly, "Sometimes kindness is safer than suspicion. The world teaches us to fear strangers, but fear closes the door on humanity. If we all turn away, what hope is left for anyone?" Her words silenced Chidinma, though doubt lingered in her eyes. Outside, the whispers grew louder, but Amara chose not to let them shake her. That evening, as she cooked dinner, she glanced at Bongani sitting quietly in the corner, his presence neither threatening nor demanding. Deep inside, she trusted her choice, even if the world did not. Bongani sat quietly in the corner of Amara's small home, his tired body resting but his eyes always watching. He noticed how carefully she measured out the rice, pouring just enough for herself and her two children. She did not eat until the children had taken their share, and even then, she smiled as though her portion was more than enough. The stranger could see it was not, yet she carried herself with dignity, never complaining. At night, when the lamps were dim and the house fell silent, Amara gathered her children close. Bongani heard her soft voice praying, asking God to give her strength, to keep her children safe, and to bless even the stranger who now shared their roof. She spoke with such sincerity that it stirred something inside him. She had no reason to include him in her prayers, yet she did without hesitation. During the day, she treated him with respect, offering food and water as if he were an honored guest instead of a burden. She never asked where he came from or why he traveled alone. Instead, she greeted him with gentle words, making sure he felt welcome. He could sense that her kindness was not an act, but a natural part of her. She gave because she believed it was right, not because she expected anything in return. Bongani took mental notes of everything he saw: the cracked walls of her home, the thin clothes of her children, the way her sewing machine struggled with old fabric. Life was hard for her, yet she carried herself like a queen, her spirit refusing to be broken. He remained silent, never revealing his thoughts, but within him, respect grew. Each passing moment deepened his curiosity. Why would a woman with so little still choose to give? Why did she treat him, a stranger, with such dignity when the world outside filled with suspicion and gossip? Bongani did not speak these questions, but they stayed in his heart. As he watched her kindness unfold in the smallest actions, he knew this was no ordinary woman. One night, as the wind whistled softly outside, Amara's youngest son began to cough. At first, she thought it was nothing, but soon his small body grew hot with fever. Panic filled her as she touched his forehead, feeling the burning heat. She tried to comfort him with water, but the child's breathing grew shallow and restless. Her daughter clung to her arm, frightened. Amara's heart pounded. She had so little money and the nearest clinic was far. Bongani, who had been lying quietly in the corner, sat up at the sound of the child's cries. Without hesitation, he asked where the nearest pharmacy was. Amara hesitated, unsure if she could trust him to go alone, but desperation pushed her to give directions. Without another word, Bongani pulled on his worn jacket, stepped into the night, and disappeared into the darkness. The hours felt endless. Amara rocked her son, whispering prayers, fear tightening her chest. She wondered if she had made a mistake. What if Bongani never returned? What if he used this chance to vanish with the little she had? Her mind battled with doubt, but her heart clung to hope. At last, the door creaked open. Bongani stepped back inside, his clothes damp with night dew, holding medicine and a fresh bottle of water. He handed them to Amara without asking for thanks. She quickly gave her son the medicine and cooled his body with wet cloths. Slowly, the child's fever began to ease and his breathing steadied. Relief washed over her like a wave. For the first time since he arrived, Amara looked at Bongani with different eyes. He had gone into the night for her child, not for himself. He had returned with exactly what was needed. Gratitude filled her heart, though questions still lingered. Who was this man, truly? Why had he helped so willingly? As her son finally drifted into peaceful sleep, Amara whispered softly, "Thank you." Bongani only nodded, his face unreadable. She felt a growing trust in him, but deep inside, the mystery of who he really was remained. The night was quiet, the only sound coming from the steady hum of crickets outside. Amara sat at her sewing machine, mending a torn dress under the dim glow of a lantern. Bongani sat nearby, watching her hands move carefully over the fabric. For days he had remained mostly silent, but that night, curiosity pressed too heavily on his chest. He leaned forward and asked softly, "Why do you do it? Why do you help strangers when you can barely take care of yourself and your children?" Amara paused, her hands stilling on the cloth. She looked at him, her eyes calm but filled with a history he could not yet read. For a moment she said nothing, only inhaled deeply as though searching for the right words. Finally she spoke in a voice steady but laced with pain. "Because I know how it feels to be forgotten." Bongani frowned, the answer settling into his heart like a heavy stone. Amara continued, her voice softer now. "When my husband died, people I thought would stand by me disappeared. I knocked on doors for help, and many turned me away. I remember the hunger, the loneliness, the way it felt to be invisible. That is why when someone knocks on my door, I cannot shut them out. I know that pain too well." Her words struck him deeply. He had expected an answer about faith or duty, but this was different. This was personal. She was not kind because life was easy for her. She was kind because life had been cruel. Bongani leaned back, unable to speak. He thought about the long journey that had brought him here, about the masks people wore, about the selfishness he had seen in many places. Yet here was a woman with nothing, choosing to give everything she could. Amara went back to her sewing as if she had said nothing extraordinary. But for Bongani, the moment was unforgettable. Her quiet truth echoed in his mind, challenging everything he thought he knew about people. For the first time, he felt a stirring he had not felt in years, respect mixed with something even deeper. The sun had barely risen when the first knock came at Amara's door. She opened it to find two women from the neighborhood, standing with folded arms and stern faces. Behind them, more neighbors gathered, whispering among themselves. The news of Bongani staying in her home had spread, and now the community demanded answers. One of the women spoke sharply. Amara, we have been patient, but this cannot continue. Who is this man? Where did he come from? You cannot keep a stranger in your house with your children. It is dangerous. Another added, we all know stories of men who pretend to be harmless but bring disaster. What if he is a thief? What if he hurts you? We will not allow trouble to come into this neighborhood because of your foolish kindness. Amara listened, her children standing nervously behind her. Bongani remained inside, silent, watching the scene unfold. Her heart pounded, but she stood tall, meeting their eyes. He has done no harm, she said firmly. He has not stolen from me. He has not raised his hand against us. On the night of the storm, he knocked, and I opened. That is all. Her words did little to calm them. Murmurs rose, some shaking their heads, others muttering that she was blind to danger. Even Chidinma, her friend, stood at the edge of the crowd, her face worried. Amara, please, she urged. Think of your children. Sometimes trust can cost more than suspicion ever would. But Amara's resolve was unshaken. I will not send away a man who has done nothing wrong, she replied. Kindness is not weakness, and fear will not rule my home. The neighbors left, their voices low but sharp, warning each other that her stubbornness would bring disaster. As the crowd dispersed, Amara closed her door with trembling hands. The weight of their judgment pressed heavily on her, yet she chose to stand by her decision. Inside, Bongani lowered his gaze, his expression unreadable. The tension in the air grew thick, but Amara's heart remained steady. She had chosen kindness, even if the world turned against her for it. The morning began like any other. Amara was at her sewing machine, her children preparing for school, when a loud knock echoed at the door. She opened it to find several men in neat suits standing outside, their vehicles lined along the dusty road. The neighbors quickly gathered, whispering, curious about why officials would come to her small, broken house. Amara's heart raced as one of the men asked, Is this the home of Madame Amara? She nodded, unsure of what was happening. Before she could speak further, Bongani stepped forward. But this time, he did not look like the weary traveler she had sheltered. His rough clothes were gone, replaced with a crisp suit that seemed to command respect. His posture was tall, his eyes clear, and his presence powerful. Amara froze, unable to understand what she was seeing. Her children clutched her hands tightly, sensing something extraordinary. In a calm voice, Bongani turned to the crowd and then to Amara. My name is Bongani Dlamini, he said. I am not a wanderer nor a man with nothing. I am a philanthropist, a man who has spent years working to uplift communities. I came here dressed as a stranger to test if true kindness still exists when nothing can be gained in return. The neighbors gasped, their mouths falling open in disbelief. The same people who had mocked Amara, warning her that she was foolish, now stood silent and ashamed. Amara's knees grew weak as she tried to process his words. She whispered, All this time, why me? Bongani's eyes softened. Because your heart spoke louder than the gossip of others. You gave without asking who I was or what I had. You showed me that kindness is not dead, even in hardship. Tears filled Amara's eyes. Her children looked up at her with pride, their small faces glowing with joy. The officials stepped forward respectfully, bowing slightly to her. The truth had been revealed, and in that moment, Amara's simple act of compassion became the seed of a story that would soon change her life forever. The air was still heavy with shock when Bongani stepped closer to Amara, his voice carrying both strength and warmth. Amara, he said, looking directly at her, you opened your door when others would have shut it. You shared your food when you barely had enough for yourself. You treated me with dignity when the world saw only a beggar. That kind of heart deserves more than words. The officials behind him nodded in agreement, and the neighbors leaned in, their curiosity burning. Bongani raised his hand and continued, From this day forward, you and your children will never struggle alone again. I will build you a bigger home where your children can grow in safety and comfort. Their education will be fully funded so they can dream beyond limits. And your sewing business? He glanced at her old machine. Its wheel rusted from years of use. Will no longer be a struggle. I will invest in it, giving you the tools and space to make it thrive. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some neighbors covered their mouths, Others exchanged guilty glances, remembering how they had mocked her. The same people who told her kindness would bring disaster now stood speechless, their words buried under the weight of truth. Amara's hands trembled as tears rolled down her cheeks. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. Her children hugged her tightly, their faces lighting up with hope. For the first time in years, Amara felt the burden of survival lift from her shoulders. Bongani reached out, gently lifting her chin so she could meet his eyes. Never doubt the power of your kindness, he said. You gave freely, and now it returns to you in abundance. The neighbors who once judged her shuffled uncomfortably, their heads lowered in shame. No one spoke. Amara, the widow they pitied and criticized, was now being honored for the very kindness they had mocked. As the officials prepared documents and plans, Amara realized her life was no longer defined by struggle, but by the compassion that had brought her here. Weeks later, the sound of Amara's sewing machine no longer came from a dark, cramped corner of her old home, but from a bright, newly built shop along the busy street. The place smelled of fresh paint and new fabric, sunlight pouring through wide windows. Customers filled the room, admiring colorful dresses and finely stitched clothes neatly displayed. For the first time, Amara had modern machines, enough fabric to work without worry, and even two young apprentices she was training. Her hands moved with confidence, her smile steady, her heart light. Her children, once dressed in worn-out clothes, now walked to school each morning in crisp uniforms, their books tucked under their arms. Their laughter filled the air when they returned home, telling her stories of their lessons and dreams for the future. The little boy who once lay sick now ran freely outside, his energy returning as if life itself had been renewed. Amara watched them with pride, grateful that they no longer had to live under the weight of lack. The community that once mocked her now treated her with respect. Neighbors greeted her warmly, some even coming to her shop for clothes. They no longer whispered behind her back but spoke of her as an example of how kindness can change a person's life. Amara, however, never allowed pride to cloud her heart. She remembered the stormy night when a stranger had knocked on her door, and she had chosen compassion over fear. Late in the evenings, after closing her shop, Amara would sit quietly, reflecting on how quickly life had turned. She had given what little she had without expecting anything, yet that single act of kindness had opened doors she never imagined. She often told her children, never hesitate to help, even when you feel you have nothing to give. That may be the very moment your life begins to change. Her story became a quiet reminder in the community that wealth is not always measured in money, but in the depth of one's heart. Because the kindness you show in secret is often the kindness that reveals your true wealth.